going to have to be updated from time to time, and many times to do the app update, the iPad software has to be updated. So, just real quickly to update iPad software, there's a settings button over here. It's a little gear on the left side. I think my batteries are going dead. With the settings button on the left side. On the very left side, I got messages, the clock, and then settings.
Okay.
So the gray one with the gear.
Yep.
So I touch that. And then in here there's general, which is highlighted in blue. And then over on the right side, the second thing down, is software update. Now it's checking for an update. So I have available to me on my iPad iOS 8.2. Now I think I'm on 8.1 right now. Some of you might be on version 7 or something of that nature. And unless you're on, I think, 8, you can't get the latest version of FieldView without having your iPad on iOS 8. Right? So check here. And then up here at the top, there's the App Store. It's the second one from the left up top. It's got a start with 10 by it. It means I've got 10 apps that can be updated. So I'm going to touch in here. And on the bottom, I'll go to Updates. And you can see in here that FieldView, right there at the top, FieldView is one that has an update. So then if on the right side, I were to touch Update, it would then update the FieldView app. Okay. Basically what FieldView is going to do then is it's going to map many of the different layers on your iPad that are being displayed numerically on the 2020. So I'm going to touch Demo right here in the middle and let this demo load. This is what it's going to look like in the cab as you're planting, and we'll walk through what you're seeing and how to utilize these maps. So across the top, where it says Demo Field, that's, if you touch in there, it'll select, you'll get a drop down of all your fields you can select. The crop is in the middle. The map that you're currently looking at is over here. So if I were to touch on population, it would show me a list of maps. Alright, so you can see the tractor and planter bar. You can see it's painting behind it. Right now we're on the population map. On the left side, in the upper left, there's a little blue button there with an arrow. If I touch that, I can see numbers over here on the right side if I want to, or left side. If I don't want to, I can see the same numbers along the 2020. I can touch that arrow again and minimize that and just see the map. Now, as we're planting here, you see that triangle just showed up. That's the arrow that we're planting. So later on for scouting purposes, that could be useful. There's little squares in here. Every small little square represents 1/5 of a second. So that's about 12, maybe 18 inches, depending on your speed. So there's population row by row. If we go back to where we started this demo, we can see this planter. I had 3 hydraulic motors, and each one planted a little bit different population there when we started. So I can go back and look at things like we just did. Now, instead of having to go back and try to find where the planter currently is, in the upper right, there's a planter icon. I just touch that. It takes me back to the planter. Want to change maps? I'm going to touch on population. I get the whole list of different maps I can see. So we talked about hybrids. I'm going to touch on hybrid. So now I've got 2 hybrids set up on the planter right now. It's showing what rows they're on here and mapping them by the row. If I touch on that report on the right, that spreadsheet button, I can see what the hybrids are, the acres of each, the start date, end date for planting. Now at the bottom there's totals. Most all of my maps have a report. So we have talked about on the 2020 how you can change hybrids. You can do it from the iPad app as well, from FieldView. Down here it says hybrid right there. If I touch on that icon, it pulls up this control page. So if I were variable rating with row flow or redrive, I could have a prescription. I can do 2 things on here. I can change my target population or my population I'm telling you I'm going to plant using these arrows, increase or decrease it, the same way I would on the 2020. And then down here where it says hybrid, I can touch in there and I get the list. I can select that one, use hybrid. Then to the right it says rows. So what rows do I have that on? All, left half, right half, evens, odds. So let's say left half. So now I can see here I've got the left half on this 36 row planner has a green dot. I can hit done. Now I can push the add hybrid button. If I have 2 on the planner, pick what that one is. I have no idea what this one is, but we'll select it. And here we'll go right half. I can see it's assigned in the right half. Press done. And then if I press confirm at the bottom, it's not going to change it in this demonstration, but if you were in the field, it will now map left and right. So my suggestion on most of these things is pick the 2020 or pick FieldView. I think personally FieldView is easier for changing hybrids and that type of thing. They'll sync. I would get used to using one of them. So for some of these other things we'll talk about, adding fields, changing fields, a lot of things you can do in both places. It doesn't matter where you do it. There's no right or wrong. They talk to each other. But I would just get used to one so I'm consistent with using one. So I'm going to touch up here where it says hybrid, get the map selector, and now I'm going to touch on, say, singulation. Now the 2020 is telling me the last 300 seeds, what's my average singulation been? Here, every red square means in that 1/5 of a second it skipped occurred. Every blue square in that 1/5 of a second multiple occurred. Green, no skips, no multiples. So I can pick out that little red square, little blue ones, each of those is a 1/5 of a second. I can touch the report on the right side, and I can see, well, my low row is row 18 at 98.4. If I scroll to the bottom of my list, I've got a bunch of rows up at 99.6. That's what, that report right there is for all the acres I've planted so far in the field. So if I plant one pass along the road for my end rows, pull this up, it's 2 acres or whatever I've planted so far. If I pull it up when I'm making the last pass through the field, it's going to be for the 80 acres. It's going to be for whatever I've planted so far. I can look at an instant report as well, and that's going to be the last 10 seconds, and it's going to update every 10 seconds. So it's going to look what's the past 10 seconds been, show that for 10 seconds, update again 10 seconds later. So this would be if I have a problem with some meters or something. Let's say I have a vac meter, my vacuum is too low. I pull up my report after I planted the end rows, and I have 2% skips. I increase my vacuum level by 2 inches. Well, if I already planted 10 acres, my next pass, it's going to take a little while for my averages to come back up. But if I hit this instant report, I can immediately see did I reduce my skips. Spacing. So this is, the reds are seeds that got closer than 2.5 inches. The oranges are seeds closer than 4 inches. So you can see where that's happening, you can see a report. Planter speed down here. So you can see there what planter speed is. Now for a lot of the reports, like population speed, downforce, if I touch the legend, I just touched it, now you can see it says edit or minimize. If I hit minimize, it shrinks it. If I tap it again, I hit edit. Now I can change my minimum, a maximum, and the number of ranges I have. So here you can see speed changes. Pick up another map. Let's look at seed release index. There you can see seed release index. I can see there's one row they're painted solid yellow all the way across. So there's something going on that row right there that's causing some problems. And then I can look at the report and see lowest to highest here, or if I touch up here where it says SRI percentage, now it's highest to lowest. So they're all below 20. but I do have 7% difference between some of the rows. Touch here, I'm going to select the downforce map. We'll talk for a little while about this. The downforce map, I believe, is one of the most useful maps. So on the 2020, you see ground contact, you see margin. That's, ground contact, percentage of time you're planning at depth in the last 3 seconds. Margin is that lowest reading in the last 3 seconds. On FieldView, we're mapping the minimum amount of weight that was carried on the gauge wheels every 1/5 of a second. So 2020 gives us 1 reading every 3 seconds. FieldView gives us 15 readings per row in 3 seconds. So I can see much more detailed information on FieldView with regards to downforce and what's happening than what I see on the 2020. So I recommend, glance at the downforce box on the 2020, but if you're just trying to decide, should I make changes, that kind of thing, use FieldView. I use the kind of example, I could jump in the cab with Aaron and we could both watch margin of ground contact and stare at it for 5 hours, jump out, and one of you could ask us and say, hey, what do you think the average margin was? What's the likelihood that us staring at a number that changes every second for 5 hours, we give the same answer? Minimal. What's the chances either of us are actually right? Minimal, because we're each going to have a little different concept of it. On FieldView, you're seeing the history, plus you get a report that quantifies it. So rather than me saying, well, it looked like I had ground contact below 100% of the time, or I had less than 100% ground contact every once in a while, well, how often was it? I don't know, 5% of the time, 10%. There's a report that actually tells you that. So basically here, we're looking at every 1/5 of a second, what's the weight on the gauge wheels. This map happens to have a load cell on every row. Many of you won't have a load cell on every row, so the rows that don't have one will just be gray on this map. Anywhere there's a blue square, it means that at some point within the 40 readings that were taken in that 1/5 of a second on that row, there was no weight on the gauge wheels at some point. So if there's a blue square, we're very confident you planted somewhat shallower than your depth, or the depth you set. Green, there was 0 to 100 pounds on the gauge wheels in that 1/5 of a second. Same with yellow or orange. And if it's a dark red, which we don't see much of out here, there was over 200 pounds of weight minimum on the gauge wheels in that 1/5 of a second. I want to avoid blues. I also want to avoid red. So loss of ground contact, shallow seeds. What's the cost of a shallow planted seed? So let's say you're planting in ideal conditions, which I would define as the top inch is dry, below an inch there's some moisture in the soil, and you're putting the seed at 1 3/4, 2 inches in the moisture. If there's consistent moisture there, you should have consistent germination. So if I plant shallow, let's say I plant a seed 3/4 of an inch deep, it's in drier soil than the ones at 1 3/4. Very likely it's going to germinate later because it doesn't have as much moisture. Very likely emerges later. If it gets 2 leaf collars or more behind, probably don't get an ear. So that's the risk of the loss of ground contact with blue squares, is no ear on the plant. What about red? In ideal conditions, that means I planted a seed at the depth I wanted, and then the gauge wheels applied over 200 pounds of force to the ground and around that seed, and 4 inches either side basically. The risk there is, as the roots develop, they hit the compacted soil, and instead of growing out and down at an angle like I want them to, they hit, they resize, they get smaller, maybe they turn, and the plant's under stress early on when it's setting its top end yield, its maximum ear size. If it's under stress, it doesn't set it up here, it sets it down here, and maybe instead of the ears that are 18 rows around, they're 16 rows around. If I do that on every one, it costs me, potentially 20 bushel or something. But it's a smaller ear where loss of ground contact could give me no ear. So I'd rather have a bunch of small ears than no ear. But that's kind of like saying, you want me to take the $5 bill or the $10 bill for a minute? You pick. I'm going to take one. Which one? So if you're going to air heavy, but don't try to get it where you're green, yellow, and orange most of the time. Having 20/20 and having the field view lets you answer the question that still to this day mystifies a lot of people at planter clinics or just in conversation, which is, I have airbags on my planter, what should the pressure gauge read? You know, Louisville Farm Show, Peoria Farm Show, Farm Progress Show, there's farmers come up and they say, hey, you work for Precision, you guys talk a lot about downforce, where should I set it? What knot should I put my spring in? And what's my answer? Depends. Totally depends. Are you in conventional tillage? Are you going into conventional tillage after 5 inches of rain in a stale seed bed? What's your soil texture? Do you have a bunch of wheel tracks in your field? The answer is it depends. But the question can be answered with 20/20 and FieldView. So what do we want? Just conceptually, we want our gauge wheel arms to hit the depth stop and stay there all the time. And then we want a little bit more weight, so we're able to firm under the gauge wheels and maintain contact with our depth stop. That's what we want. Consistent depth, whatever this depth is that I set, I want that to be consistent with a little bit of firming, but nothing more, nothing too compact. So here, I see the map, I touch my report, and this is showing me every row that's being measured. But if I look at the bottom, for the acres I've planted so far in the field and the acres we've measured, I see what percentage of the readings had blue squares or loss of ground contact, meaning I have shallow seeds. What percentage had good downforce, meaning I had some weight on the gauge wheels but not over 200 pounds. So that means I had depth plus some firming. And where did I have excess downforce, meaning over 200 pounds? So to correlate this to yield, what percentage of the acres am I at risk for losing an ear on? What percentage of the acres am I at risk for a small ear on? And what percentage of the acres should I be able to optimize ear size given the weather and the fertility of the seed? Right? So where do you set your springs? Where do you set your airbag pressure? We go from it depends to I plan a little bit in the field, I set it, where I make an educated guess, I set it, I plan a little bit, I pull up the downforce map and I look at this report. If I see loss of ground contact at 30%, what do? I increase my spring pressure, I increase my airbag PSI. Right? If I see my loss of ground contact at 0.8, my good at 40, my excess at 60%, then what? I would decrease my airbag pressure, decrease my spring pressure. Now, anytime you're controlling the planter wide, where every row is set the same, so this would be if I'm using, if I have springs that I'm going to adjust manually, airbags I adjust manually, whether it's in the cab or on the planter, or even with Precision Planning's Air Force system, you're going to have to accept some amount of loss of ground contact, some amount of excess, and try to keep the good as high as possible. So what are acceptable numbers? From my experience in 6 years of looking at FieldView maps reports, looking at different planners, the way they run, 5% loss of ground contact is roughly an acceptable number. Now, when we talk about delta force this afternoon, these numbers that I'm saying right now are very different with delta force. But with manual adjustment or with air force, I probably want to try to adjust my downforce system so I can keep this loss of ground contact 5%, maybe a touch less. So then what I'm managing from that point is, how do I get my good as high as possible, excess as low as possible, without getting my loss of ground contact higher than that 5% level? Okay? Now, different planners that are equipped with different equipment are going to be able to get those numbers more fine-tuned or less fine-tuned. So if I have springs on my parallel arms or in the center as my downforce system, John Deere T-handle, for instance. Notch 1 applies 125 pounds. Notch 2 applies 250. Notch 3 applies 375. So I can adjust in 125 pound increments. So if I see loss of ground contact at 7%, I increase my applied force on my spring by 125 pounds. It's very possible that my loss of ground contact is going to go to 3. So I either pick 3 or 7. And then my excess might go up another 10 or 15% by increasing my spring pressure by 125 pounds. And I can't really adjust it more fine-tuned than that, so that's where I live with. I do the best I can with that system. Now, if I have airbags and I can adjust them from 0 to 120 psi, and anywhere along that spectrum, I see 7% loss of ground contact, maybe I bump it up to 10 psi and see what happens. Now I get down to 4.5, I get my good to 70%, and my excess is 25. Now I'm in good shape. If that 10 psi increase doesn't quite get it, I can bump it up another 5. With airbags, 1 psi of pressure in your airbag system applies 3.3 pounds of actual weight to the row unit. Okay? So if you set your airbag pressure at 100 psi, you're not applying 100 pounds of weight, you're applying 330. Okay? So that's something to keep in mind. I was at a planner clinic doing more of a sales type presentation a couple weeks ago, and I just made the comment, and I said, guys, realize that your PSI and the actual pounds applied is not a 1-to-1. That if you have 100 PSI in your airbags, because you set it and say that's the best way I can guess, you're applying 330 pounds to the row, plus a 250 pound row unit, plus 50 pounds of seed in the hopper. I'm up to 500-600 pounds. And there's a guy in the audience who goes, and turned to talk to his dad. So I assumed that they were running a little bit too heavy. And I was making the point that, look guys, if you have 20/20 FieldView, you can measure and adjust that properly. If I see 25% loss, I probably bump my pressure in my airbags, if that's my system, up 20-30 psi. If I see 8% loss, I probably bump it up 5 or 10 psi. See where I can get. Okay. With Air Force, depending on the scenario, you're probably still going to be down around 5%, maybe a touch lower, depending on your tillage scenario. Good downforce with Air Force, probably 75 to 85. Good downforce with manually adjusted springs or airbags, typically between 50 and 80. Now, conventional tillage, row hopper planters, and airbags, if I'm controlling that system manually, I'm going to have an opportunity to have better good downforce. If I have a central fill planter in no-till or strip-till with spring downforce, I've got uneven weight, I've got springs that adjust by 100 pounds at a time, and I'm in a more variable environment typically, my opportunity for good downforce to be high is going to be less. Okay? So I'll show you some fields with Air Force this afternoon. A strip-till field with a 12-row John Deere hopper planter with Air Force, a conventional till field with a 16-row John Deere hopper planter. Good downforce on the conventional is 92%. Good downforce on the strip-till is 70%. So other things you can do with FieldView. So there's a button right here, it's the split view button. So if I touch that, I can look at 2 maps side by side. So there's speed and population. Let's pull up speed beside good ride. Pull up the legends here. Now the good ride is extremely smooth over here, so we don't really see any rough ride spots, but if we did, we could say, okay, were we going faster in that spot? Or you could pull this up and then shift up, speed up a half mile an hour. See, did my increased speed affect my ride? Maybe, maybe not, but you'd see a map of it here. So you'd see, did it affect certain rows, that type of thing. Okay, if it does, my good ride was poorer. You can maybe compare good ride and spacing. Did my rough ride affect my spacing? You could potentially see that. Now, if you saw rough ride affect spacing, you probably want to do something about it, whether that be slowing down working the field again, whatever it might be. Just because you see some rough ride, if it's not affecting spacing, there's really no need to change something for it. So if I see 90% good ride, 89% good ride, and my singulation, spacing, population, and depth control are all very good, there's no reason I need to slow down. But if I see my ride, if I speed up or go to a different field, my ride goes from 93% to 88%, and my spacing goes from 99 to 94, now I know I'm having an effect on my spacing. I probably want to look into making an adjustment. So that's split view. If I touch that button again, it goes back to single. In this little arrow, there's a few different things that can be done. There's a planting summary. So for this field, for what you've planted so far, I can get one kind of report card of how the planter is performing. Singulation, here's the field action. Singulation, spacing, good ride. Loss of ground contact, good downforce, excess. It'll list the hybrids you've planted, how many acres of each, and then based on 80,000 seeds per unit, how many units. It totals average population for that field. If you wanted to email that to yourself or someone else, you can hit that envelope button. It'll pull up a client. You can just type in an email address and email that off. Also, there's drop field pin. If I hit that and hit drop field pin, right in the center of the planter, it's going to drop a green field pin. And awesome, with the last update, it added the date and the time, which we've asked for. That's great. So it'll tell you the date and the time of dropping the pin. The latitude, longitude, you can touch add photo up here. Don't know why it needs a microphone. So I can then take a picture of whatever, accept that, and then that picture is there. I can type in a note if I want to, whatever note, touch on save. Now that's going to stay there. I can look at it later. I can look at it throughout the summer if I want to. You can also just push and hold your finger on the screen and drop a pin also. Same. Also under here, you can take a screenshot of what's on the screen right now if you wanted to. Then you can either just save it to the iPad or email it. So, anytime I get away from the planter and I'm looking at something else, if I touch the planter icon, it'll take me back. For that. So let's talk about field creation, and then we'll get into that. So if you have a new 2020, or if you have an existing one, you need to add fields. You can do it through the 2020. I suggest doing it on the FieldView app. So I'll show you that. So here from the home screen, so basically if I'm not on this screen, if I'm in the map, there's the home button right there. On any other screen, I can touch the house, the home icon. And here you see in the upper right, there's fields. Now there's multiple ways to get fields in here. One is, if you've had a 2020 in the past, you add FieldView to it, all your fields from the 2020 will sync over. If you have a new 2020 in the FieldView system, and you map your fields in Climate Basic, either now or in the next few business days, your fields should be showing up on the FieldView side. Or, you can hit the plus button right there and select a client or add a new client, select a farm or add a new farm, and then type in your field name. Sometimes things go to, if you don't select client or farm, it goes to default. I would suggest always having a client or a farm, even if you have 15 fields and you call the North 80, the back 40, Bill's, Bob's, whatever it might be, and you don't use clients and farms, you just have field names, just put in your name or your farm name for the client and the farm. So it doesn't say default client, default farm. It's a lot simpler if you go to later, you say, hey, I have a problem with my downforce system this spring. Can I email you from my website? Can I email you the field file? You look at the downforce map, me, Aaron, whoever, if you wanted somebody to look at it, and let me know what you think was going on. Well, if it shows up under default client, default farm, or North 80, and somebody else emails us a North 80, we're going to have to zoom out, figure out where it's located in the world, and to figure out which field it is. If it says Baker Farms, North 80, it's pretty easy to figure out whose it is. So if I can touch in here where it says client, and I can either select from a list if I already have some in there, or I can type a new one in. See, I already put your name in here. I'll put KC. And then if I touch create, it's going to create that client. Now, under that client, I'm going to create the farm. So there's clients. Under the clients are farms. Under the farms are fields. Right? So I'm creating this farm under a specific client. Now, if I go search fields, there you can see back shed field. Now, if I touch on that, we have in here what's called a planting plan, which hopefully will simplify things when we get to the field. So I could go through, add clients, add farms, add fields, get them all added, get them all in here, and then go through this planting plan. And this is meant for you to fill out ahead of time, and you can input your crop that you intend to plant, corn, soybeans, there's a whole list, but let's say corn. Then if I have a hybrid I plan to plant, I can select it from that same list. I can put in how many acres the field is if I want to. If I plan to plant multiple hybrids, I can add multiple, but when we get to the field, it's only going to make the top one active on all rows. So if you split the planter, you'll have to assign them when you make the field active. Down here below, if you use row flow or V-drive for variable rate, you could select a prescription and attribute. If you're not using variable rate, it would be on manual, and what you type in here is the set point that it's going to use to monitor from. When you do this, if you've either planted with 2020 FieldView before or you've imported fields from Climate Basic, since we have spatial data and know your field location, when you drive inside of that, you'll get a prompt on the iPad that says, do you want to make X field active? And you can hit yes, and then once you hit yes, it's going to pull up this screen right here. And it's going to have in it everything you already selected in the planting plan. So whatever I put in from a manual rate and the top hybrid I put in, it'll have it assigned to all rows. If all this is correct, I hit confirm, it changes my active field, changes my population monitoring set point, and changes the hybrid that is being mapped. Now, if I had split the planter, I'd have to come in here, assign this to half, add another hybrid, assign it to the other half, and then hit confirm. So you don't have to do that planting plan deal, but if you do it ahead of time, and then what you end up actually doing is what you planned on doing, it should make things a little bit easier there. All right, so from here at home, I want to show you under the tools button. For those of you who may have been using 2020 FieldView for a while, or those of you that are new, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, there's a way that you can remove a map to reduce the storage space FieldView is using on your iPad hard drive without losing the data. So see, I've got all the way back to 2011 at the top. So this is under Tools and Data Manager. So if I go back to 2011, you know, there's fields in here. I don't have a lot of them with data, so let's do 12. So in here, if I've got all my fields from 2012, I've got all the maps built, and I've got a lot of data, or a lot of storage space on my iPad to use, I can go back to 2012. The likelihood of me wanting that map to look at, or all of them right now, is fairly low. I could check mark them individually here, or if I hit in the upper left, it'll check mark all of them. And at the bottom, I can press clear map, and that will remove the actual map picture. So when I go to the map page, there won't be a map for 2011. So that's a way to keep your data, but not use up a lot of storage space. to try to clear up some confusion some people have here. There's iCloud. That is Apple's branded cloud storage. So just like iPad, iPhone, iCloud is a Apple product. Cloud-based storage systems are used by thousands of businesses and made by or administered by thousands of companies. So we have a precision planning cloud that basically is a server somewhere that houses information. Apple also has their branded iCloud. Okay, so here's the reason why. If you call us and say, "Hey, my iCloud is getting full. What can I do?" We're going to be like, "Well, we need to talk to Apple." If you call and say, "I'm having trouble with the precision planning cloud. I can't figure something out," we're going to be like, "Oh, okay. What can we help you with?" So iCloud is a Apple product. So there's iCloud storage, excuse me, which backs up things on your iPad to Apple's cloud. This storage is the actual hard drive of your iPad. So if you have a 32 gig iPad, you don't actually get 32 gigs of storage. Looks like you get 27.1. Because here I can see I'm using 25 gigs of storage on mine, and there's 2 gigs available. If I touch the manage storage, it's going to populate and show me what apps here are using how much storage. Okay, so then if I have apps on here I have no need for, whatever it might be, I can delete that. Or, if FieldView is using 15 gigs, I could go in and clear maps from last year, the year before, keep the data, but reduce the storage. The map takes up like 2 or 3x the amount of space as the file from which it's built. So this is a 97-acre field. You can tell this one was variable rated. So in the very upper right corner, there's a little person icon where the planner icon was. So when I'm disconnected from the 2020, it turns into a person. I open the app and touch on the person there. It shows us up in your house. But that's because we're inside with poor reception. So out in the field with good cell reception, and you've got to have a cellular plan to be able to do this. And you've got to have a cellular enabled iPad to have GPS. It'll show you, should be with good service within a planner pass. Usually it's not going to be within an inch, but within a planner pass. That'll show you where you're at. So as you carry your iPad and walk through a field, it'll move with you. So if I wanted to, pull in and drive along these trees here at the end of the field and park the truck right there, I can walk out in these different populations and look and see, in mid-June, does the corn in one population versus another look different? Or the soybeans, does it look like, is there better canopy in one population versus the other? Whatever it might be. I can switch the map as I'm out there. I can see here, hybrid map, what hybrids were planted where. I can touch the report, see the acres, start date, end date. I want to use this for scouting. Pull in that field entrance you see right there off the highway. I can walk out, I know right when I'm in the green hybrid, or right when I'm in that orange hybrid. And I could push and hold and drop a pin, or use this button, and if I'm physically out there, drop a pin at my GPS location. Take a picture of a weed, stun a plant, a pest, whatever it may be. That pin will be there and you go back to it. You can see where all those different hybrids are. About downforce, I can pull up a downforce map, and if I had varying downforce, where there's some places in the field where I had excess downforce, a lot of red, other places where I had good downforce, I could walk to a spot where I have pretty solid red, maybe dig some plants, look at root development, are they behind, go to a place where I had quite a lot of blue, see if I've got plants that are late emergers, see if I got plants, couple leaf collars behind. So Here you can see, just in here, we've got lost ground contact on some rows, and there's some red excess downforce in some places. If there's, for some reason, a map that you don't desire to see or have in your list, you can go from home, I can go to settings and enable maps. And let's say I'm not using a liquid sensor, a flow sensor. I can uncheck liquid. Let's say I'm not using air force or delta force. I can uncheck applied downforce. I'm not using yield sense. I can uncheck these four. And then your map list will become shorter. So if there's maps that are never going to show you anything, you might as well not have it in your list to select from. Also here under settings, this bottom one, version info, will show you version and the date. And we always tell you what version of seed sense software or yield sense software for harvest you need to have to be compatible with this FieldView app version. So if you update your FieldView app today while you're here, haven't updated your 2020 since last year, you want to get version, the latest version is 2015.1 for your 2020.